Earlier this week, Vice President Kamala Harris laid out her economic policy. Earlier today, I had a chance to catch up with Samantha Tweedy, who is the CEO of the Black Economic Alliance, to talk about how does that policy impact African Americans. Here's our conversation.
Samantha, Vice President Kamala Harris has laid out her economic policy. The Black Economic Alliance has taken a look at it. Speak to this, what she's laid out, and how it will specifically benefit African Americans.
Absolutely. So first, Roland, it is good to be on with you today. And the Black Economic Alliance is a coalition of Black business leaders who came together with a singular purpose: to leverage the business acumen, network, influence of the Black business community to advance work, wages, and wealth across the entire Black community. Earlier this year, BEA Foundation released our policy agenda to advance Black work, wages, and wealth, with the singular focus on identifying the key policy initiatives that would move the needle on Black economic prosperity and wealth building. Testament to the strength of the policy agenda for Black folks was that within weeks of the release, under the leadership of CBC Chairman Stephen Horsford, the CBC in joint resolutions in the House and Senate, endorsed with all 60 members of the CBC as co-sponsors that agenda. I give all of that background to say, when we look at VP Harris's opportunity economy and the agenda behind it, it is clear to us, full stop, that this is an agenda that is good for Black folks. What I want to get to in a minute is that while that is true, full stop, period, it's also an economy, it's also an agenda that is good for growing the entire American economy. So a couple highlights that we saw in her agenda, which were reflected in our Black work, wages, wealth agenda, things like creating more housing to own and to rent, more good paying jobs, lowering costs. And we see that she's giving more than 100 million working and middle class Americans a tax cut, including, importantly, $6,000 for new parents during the first year of a child's life, making housing more affordable by building 3 million new homes through a new home buyer tax credit, helping more Americans experience the pride of home ownership by providing up to $25,000 for a down payment on a first home, investing in American entrepreneurship, spurring 25 million new business applications in our first term, expanding the startup expense tax deduction from $5K to $50K for new businesses, and I can go on and on and on. The thing that's important to know here is that in addition to creating the policy agenda, we went out and we asked Black voters what those top economic issues are that matter to them for elected officials to prioritize. And these top to bottom: home ownership, renting and buying, being able to advance and expand access to capital for Black entrepreneurs, job and workforce development rose to the top every time. Now, as I mentioned, it's important, and I think when we talk about the context of this opportunity agenda and what it means for Black Americans, that we also call out that this is good for everyone. We have so much data that shows now that when we have an economic agenda like this, one that addresses the racial economic disparities across housing, access to capital, et cetera, what we see, and for example, in city data that came out that told us that if we had closed those kinds of economic disparities over just the last 2 decades, we would have added $16 trillion to the GDP. That's not just the Black GDP, right? That's not just the Black and brown GDP. That's the United States GDP. So the headline here is that this is an economic agenda that is very good for advancing Black economic prosperity and wealth building. And it's an economic agenda that's going to be good for business and grow the entire American economy.
But how have you been drilling that down to the regular, average, ordinary brother or sister? And that's the issue that as I travel the country, I often hear folks say, hey, that's all great. That sounds all rosy, but I'm not feeling it. I'm not seeing it. It doesn't impact me. And so what are you doing to specifically communicate that to folks who ordinarily are not operating in Washington, D.C., in New York, who are not necessarily consumers of a lot of news?
That's right. And that is so important. I mean, you say all the time here, right, Roland, that Black voters are not a monolith, number one. And number two, that we are going to, and Vice President Harris is going to need to, and every elected official is going to need to work for the vote. And that is going to be true so long as we are still at a place in this country where Black folks are at the losing end of a 6-to-1 racial wealth gap, where we're still looking at housing disparities that are as large as they were during Jim Crow. So we just want to make sure as a starting point that when we are talking to Black voters and with Black voters, that we are starting with that acknowledgement. Now, we just did polling, and important to call out that this polling happened once Vice President Harris was at the top of the ticket. So this is fresh and this is relevant. We did polling across the country with a prioritization on the battleground states that showed us that right now, economic issues are still top of mind for Black voters. And that's above immigration, national security, abortion, everything else. The other thing that the data found was that Black business leaders are the most trusted messengers on those economic issues. 13% more trusted than elected officials, 27% more trusted than celebrities. So what that said to us is that BEA, this nonpartisan coalition of Black business leaders, and all our network and allies need to be in direct conversation with voters right now around these issues. So in addition to running with the vice president and the campaign, we need to run alongside the vice president in the campaign, speaking directly from Black business leaders to voters. So we next week are launching, for this final stretch until Election Day, a direct voter contact program that's going to include both digital ads and text messages. Again, as you've been talking about here, Roland, the ads are great, but we have to be in conversation with voters. And that's what we'll be doing. So across Pennsylvania, Nevada, Georgia, North Carolina, and Michigan, where very importantly, the number of infrequent Black voters will be decisive margins of victory, both for Vice President Harris, and we should note too, Hakeem Jeffries becoming the first Black Speaker of the House. And so in all of those states and districts, we'll be having these conversations, leveraging the trusted messengership of the Black business community on the economic issues that we know will motivate Black voters most in this final stretch.
Where are these digital ads running, and how many people are we talking about when you're talking about reaching them via text message?
It's a perfect question. So we analyzed the infrequent Black voter numbers across states where we know that there are decisive margins of Black voters. So when we look across those 5 states, Georgia, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Nevada, there are about 1.5 million infrequent Black voters. And from our prior cycles where we've done this kind of engagement with voters, what we know is that we can expect a 45% engagement rate. So what that gets us to is the ability to be in active conversation with 700,000 voters between now and Election Day. So we'll be running those ads, and we'll be doing that direct conversation through text messages where we can make sure that folks have the information they need to vote. We can respond to their questions, and we can provide them with this economic messaging that we know will mobilize and motivate.
So you said the ads are running on platforms or directly in text messages?
Digital ads and text messages. So we're going to do both strategies because we know that the impact is greater when we can run both, right? You know, you just think about when you've seen an ad on your digital and then you get a message on your phone that's saying the same thing, right? That's reinforcing those messages. They go further. And one thing I would say, I'm sorry, Roland, go ahead.
So the digital ads are running where? What platforms are they running on?
Oh, what platforms are they going to be running on? They're going to be running on YouTube, and instead of other digital platforms that will vary a bit depending on geography, by us being able to break down where we know Black voters, particularly young male Black voters, are focused, given what we know is still the work that we need to do there to mobilize that critical voting bloc to be able to come through for Election Day. And the one other note I was going to make was we're all sitting here, so many of us, watching our phones blow up every day with text message after text message. But for the demographic of voters that we're talking about, that is not the situation. So we know that the text messages is an incredibly meaningful way to break through and get in that direct conversation with voters.
Anything in person, anything on the ground?
So we are doing this alongside organizations that are doing the kind of on the ground mobilization that we know is so critically important, doing what you say, Roland, sort of touching and feeling the voter. At this point, I think what we would all say is that all of it matters and all of it needs to happen. For us as the Black Economic Alliance, we see our highest and best use as being the messengers of those economic issues in ways that we know will break through. So we will be in all of these battleground states alongside our partners who are doing that on the ground voter reg, and we'll be doing the persuasion messaging around the economic issues.
When we talk about in terms of small businesses, in terms of building capacity, things along those lines, there has been tremendous growth over the last 3 years under Biden-Harris, but frankly, that has not been articulated enough, explained enough. I've had the head of the SBA on as well, and so to me, I think that's also one of the areas. Yeah. And one of the things, like perfect example, when the vice president was in Detroit unveiling her economic plan, I said on the show afterwards that I thought one of the biggest mistakes was not actually having individuals with businesses in the audience. At one point, he would stand up and say, hey, here are people that went out of business during COVID and brought the businesses back. That's to me, that's also a constant, a missed opportunity in many of these states.
I think that's right. And actually, that's why back in the spring, the Black Economic Alliance partnered with VP Harris on her Economic Opportunity Tour, where we went with her to all of these same battleground states. We were with her together in Detroit, in Atlanta, and actually doing just what you're saying, Roland. We were sitting there, with audiences of small business owners and local community to be able to do just what you described, which was to help message the successes of the Biden-Harris administration, but also to make it real for folks. And so outside of all of those auditoriums, there would be fairs, where folks could actually go and sign up for these resources, learn more. And it was that Economic Opportunity Tour that really led to the framing for this opportunity agenda that we now see Harris running on. What we said then, though, is that just talking about the track record wasn't enough. At the time, if voters aren't feeling it yet, then we needed that forward-looking, that aspirational, that what is going to come next to make sure that I know that my dollars are going to stay in my wallet, that those dollars are going to grow, that costs are going to go down, that I'm going to have more access. And I think that has been the flip that we've seen with Harris at the top of the ticket, that it's not just her lauding the track record. As significant as that track record truly is for Black economic progress, it's always also this forward-looking vision that folks can see themselves in and can really understand that it's going to get better for me, better for my family, and better for my community.
How specifically are y'all trying to message to Black men? When you look at the data, obviously Black women vote for Democrats with the highest rate. Black women are second. But when you look at polls out there, when you look at data out there, a lot of these young African-American men, 35, say they are potentially looking at Donald Trump, but it's not like he's laying out an economic agenda. And so, so how are you messaging to them, and who specifically are you positioning to talk to them?
Yes. So we disaggregated all of our data so that we were looking not just at Black voters, but we were looking by gender and by age as well. And for young Black voters, economic issues, again, rose completely to the top. And Black business leaders as those messengers rose to the top. Then there were really helpful nuances once we looked, Roland, at the messaging and how you talk about these issues. So, for example, when you talk about lowering costs, which is important to all Black folks, what we saw with men was that talking about this within the context of wages was most persuasive, whereas when you looked at Black women, it said jump straight to lowering costs. And so we were able to learn those kinds of messaging nuances that are going to inform everything that we are saying as we're going out as this coalition of Black business leaders, talking specifically to young Black men. And that's what we have to do. We also have to know that our starting point needs to be to acknowledge the realities, right? If we just jump in, whether it's VP Harris or whether it's us as business leaders running alongside the VP in the campaign, and we start talking about what's coming next without talking about the current state, the pain, the structures, the actual issues that have been holding Black folks back when it comes to economic progress, then our messaging is going to fall on deaf ears. And so that starting point, that acknowledgement has to be the way to open up the door to every conversation when we are engaging young Black male voters.
Last point. There are, 39 days left in terms of before Election Day. Early voting is already starting in some of these places. And it is going to be an election by the margins. You look at 2020, Georgia, Arizona, and if you look at even Michigan, you can throw in Pennsylvania, very slim margins. Obama won North Carolina by 14,100 votes. In 2008, North Carolina potentially is a state that is in play for the vice president this year as well. Rural voters, you talked about your text messaging campaign. Have you broken down the data in terms of those voters and what they want to hear? Because their concerns in rural North Carolina and rural Georgia are different than what's happening in larger cities. So speak to that.
Yeah, that's right. And that's why it's exciting for us to do this as this national coalition, because we have business leaders in Georgia. We have business leaders in North Carolina. And so this isn't just, as you said, DC, New York messaging that's coming to the forefront. What we're excited to do in the first week of this program is to do A/B testing, where we can take all that messaging and framing and we can put a couple different versions of it out, so that we can see within those very first days, does this message work better, in Atlanta? And that message look better when we're speaking to rural voters. And then we'll be able to share that out with all of the community of partners that we're in this work with, so that messaging is influencing everyone. You made the point that's the most important one now, is that we are in a race to the finish line. And so we have to be moving urgently. We have to be learning as we go, and we have to be connected and sharing all of this information with the group of partners who are all in it in this push, understanding that the Black vote will be decisive and that we collectively have the power to have deep influence over what that vote looks like come election day.
All right. Samantha Tweedy, Black Economic Alliance. We appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
Thanks for your leadership, Roland. I'll talk to you soon.
All right, folks, real quick to our panel here. I'll start with you, Robert. That economic message, if you look at the polling data, you see how Vice President Kamala Harris is gaining ground against Donald Trump, and people closing that gap in terms of her commitment to the economy. And so I think that's one of the reasons why you're seeing it play out in these polls that are showing an incremental lead expanding for Harris.
You're absolutely correct. I was with Congressman Jonathan Jackson, who was up in Grand Rapids, Michigan yesterday, speaking to a group of voters, primarily African Americans. And the benefit that Vice President Harris has is that she has a team behind her. She has a roster behind her where you can deploy people across the country to do just as was said, speak to small groups of African American voters, answer the questions, put aside some of the concerns that are being spread by Russian disinformation and COINTELPRO operations online, and tell people exactly what the real economic message is and how it will benefit them. Donald Trump doesn't have that. George Bush isn't supporting Donald Trump. Dick Cheney ain't supporting Donald Trump. Mitt Romney ain't supporting Donald Trump. It really is just him. And by not having that team around him, it's clear that he's the only person that can carry his messaging. And Kamala Harris very much shows what happens when you have a unified government and a unified party that seeks to push these ideals forward. And all you have to do is dive into the analysis of these facts. Every economic analysis has said that Donald Trump's plan to govern through tariffs somehow is complete nonsense. It does not work mathematically. The numbers don't math. The math don't math. If you look at Kamala Harris's plan, you're going to see something that's going to help the middle class. It's just a matter of translating that to where people can understand it.
The reality here, Michael, is that again, I think people need to calm the hell down and look at this election, because I hate when people say if the election was held today. It's not.
Right.
It's not. And so what you're seeing is a candidate and a campaign, again, methodically build. The vice presidential debate will be carrying right here on the Blackstone Network, taking place on Tuesday. I doubt there's going to be a second debate between her and Trump. But again, this thing is building, building, building. That's what you're seeing.
Absolutely. And, I've been going through her economic plan that was just released that you just discussed. Black Enterprise has a good article dealing with how this plan will help Black people. And one of the things they talk about is dealing with food costs, groceries. And they talk about how Black families spend 1.5 times more on food than white families. So Kamala Harris, as president, introducing a federal ban on price gouging for groceries would disproportionately benefit African Americans, Black people. It talks about directing 33% of federal contracts to Black and Latino-owned small businesses. That's huge. Okay, millionaires are created by federal contracts. Okay, so and I've managed 2 Black-owned companies that had contracts with local and state government. Federal is huge, and you have people who say, "Oh, well, this is not specifically for Black people." Right. Race-based policies are illegal based upon Title VI of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, Section 601, non-discrimination and federally assisted programs. So people have to understand law, but you can write policies that disproportionately positively benefit African Americans.
And we see that. And Jelana, the reality is, I love these people who say, Vice President Kamala Harris, she's copy and pasting Biden's economic plan. Well, it is the Biden-Harris agenda. So I would think that if you the Harris in the Biden-Harris agenda and it's going well, that you ain't got a problem doing it.
Well, I agree with you there, team. But I think that what's important about Vice President Harris's plan, her economic plan, one, we got to remember she hadn't had all this time to get her message out. She literally took over at the top of the Democratic ticket in was July or August. So for people to expect for her to have explained everything like Donald Trump could have, because he's still conceptualizing shit, is wrong. But I think she's doing a good job. And what I think is really important about what she's doing is she's taking into consideration, and I want to make sure I don't mix this, that she's tackling racial and gender disparities by investing in communities of color and promoting economic justice. Why is that important? Because in this climate of Republicans and Trump getting rid of DEI,
right,
talking about critical race theory, where you want to just erase where we are today and why we are where we are today, we've got to have policies that address why and where we are today. Also, insofar as affordable housing, we need affordable rental. We talked about affordable home ownership if you want, but also we have a homelessness problem, and there are a lot of kids who are homeless. And I will tell you that Vice President Harris's economic plan addresses homelessness. You can go to any city and you will see where the mayors in those big cities are trying to move out the homeless population with their conventions and things coming. If you don't have a stable place to stay, you can't get a job, you can't get rest, you don't have a place to keep your food.
Everything. Visit our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. You can register for the online history classes that I teach. We deal with thousands of years of history. I teach 2 online history classes, Saturdays 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. and Sundays 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. Saturdays is Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, understanding the transatlantic slave trade, what they didn't teach you in school. And then on Sundays, Black resistance movements, from Christopher Columbus to the Haitian Revolution and the Black Power movement, 1492 to 1968. So we have classes coming up this weekend. Classes on sale, $80. We do the sessions live. All the sessions are archived and recorded. You can go back and watch it any time. We have a bundle pack of courses. You can register for both classes also. I do a PowerPoint presentation. We have book references, articles, video clips. Even after the course is over with, you still have access to the full class. You can go back and watch it anytime. And then Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, understanding transatlantic slave trade. That meets this weekend also. You can we have the course outline here that you can download as well. So it gives you a lesson plan for each class session. There's about 100 articles that we reference. The first class is about 200 slides, 15 books that we reference. You don't have to buy any of the books to follow along in class. Click right here to download the lesson plan also, okay? I show you it's a very visual class, so I show you the excerpts of the books right on the screen, all right? Okay, so the content is PG-13. You can use this with your children as well. I don't do a lot of cursing. It's not overly vulgar or anything like that. It's nothing like that, okay? Let me see. I just want to make sure I get through all these.